I was 32 years old and sitting across from my husband at a restaurant on Hazeldean Road when my son called me from his grandmother's phone and said 7 words that ended every assumption I had ever made about the woman who raised the man I married. Colin had booked the reservation as a surprise. We hadn't gone out, just the two of us, since Jack was born 7 years earlier, and most of those years we had marked occasions the way exhausted parents do. A grocery store cake split over the sink, the kids already in bed, calling it a celebration because we needed it to be one. That evening, Colin had made me promise to leave my phone in my jacket pocket for the whole meal. I promised. I almost kept it. The call came 20 minutes in, just after the bread basket arrived. The number was his mother's landline. I picked up because Jack was at Gloria's, and because I have never once in my life been able to ignore my son's potential reach for me. He didn't say hello, he said, in a small, careful voice I recognized as the one he used when he was trying not to cry. Grandma says you might have to go away soon. Are you sick, like she said? I remember putting down my fork. I remember Colin watching my face change. Buddy, I said, I'm not sick. Where did you hear that? There was a pause and a rustling, and then Gloria's voice came on the line, bright and easy and warm. Oh, Nina, sorry about that. He just had a little moment. Everything's fine here. You two enjoy your night. She hung up before I could answer. Colin asked what happened. I tried to explain, and it came out smaller than it felt. The way those things do when you're holding them up to someone who loves you and wants very much for everything to be fine. He said Jack had probably been half asleep, that it was nothing, that his mother had it handled. I nodded and picked up my fork, and I did not take a single bite of food for the rest of the meal. But here is what I kept coming back to in the car on the way home. Jack had not sounded like a child waking from a nightmare. He had sounded like a child reciting something he had been taught. To understand why I didn't turn the car around right then, you need to understand what Gloria meant to our family. Her husband, Colin's father, had died 3 years earlier of a sudden heart attack at 61. Colin was an only child. Gloria had gone overnight from a woman with a partner and a full house in Barhaven to a woman alone in 4 bedrooms with too many years still ahead of her and no obvious way to fill them. She had been a school librarian for 26 years. She knew children the way certain people know music, by ear, with confidence, with a quiet assumption that others couldn't quite hear what she heard. When Jack was born, she had been at the civic hospital before Colin had finished changing out of the gown the nurses gave him. She had held our newborn with the sureness of someone who had been waiting for exactly this. I was grateful then, and I need to say that plainly, because it matters. Postpartum had been harder than I expected. Colin was on rotating shifts with OC Transpo, 3 overnight runs a week, and there were stretches of those first months where Gloria was the only other adult I saw in daylight. She brought meals from the Lebanese place on Merivale. She held Jack while I slept 4 hours in a row for the first time in weeks. She knew things about babies I didn't know yet, and she shared them without condescension, or so I believed then. The problem is that leaning becomes a shape. After long enough, you can't quite straighten back up without something feeling wrong. The overreach started the way it always starts, with small things delivered in a gentle voice. She would mention at Sunday dinner that Jack seemed tired on the days I took him to the park in the afternoon, as though the timing itself were slightly off. She would correct something I said about his routine in front of Colin, warmly, the way you correct a student who has misread the card catalog. She had opinions on everything and delivered them as facts, and somewhere in the years of it I had stopped hearing the difference. She had started sitting for Jack regularly after he turned 5 every other week at first, then more often once Colin's shift schedule added overnights. Always available, always happy to come over. I told myself we were lucky. Not everyone has family nearby who wants to be that involved. I said that sentence so many times it stopped meaning anything. The change in Jack had started last autumn. He had always been an easy child, the kind who made friends at Kanata Commons Park inside of 10 minutes, and who got song lyrics deliberately wrong to make me laugh. But sometime around Thanksgiving he had gone quiet in a way that was new. Not sad, watchful. He started pausing in doorways before entering rooms, checking who was inside first. His teacher at Henry Monroe sent me an email in November saying he'd been spending recess alone and had asked her twice in 1 week whether moms could get sick suddenly. I read that email 3 times and filed it under things to think about later. Later never came. In December, he drew the same picture over and over for 2 weeks. Our house, always from the outside, always with one small figure standing at the front door, holding something and looking out at the street rather than in. I found 17 of those drawings in his school bag one afternoon while I was looking for his lunch container. Under the last one, in his unsteady 7-year-old printing. Waiting for the sign. I stared at that for a long time. Then I smoothed the drawings flat, put one on the fridge with a magnet, and decided he was going through a creative phase. He took it down that same evening when he thought I wasn't looking. There was also the pouch. I had seen it once in January, small, navy blue, zippered, the kind of thing a bank gives away at a community fair. He'd had it in his jacket pocket, and when I asked, he pulled it back fast and said it was private, that Grandma gave it to him. I had asked Gloria about it the next time I saw her. She smiled and told me she had put in some emergency phone numbers and a few dollars, because Colin worked nights and she worried. It seemed thoughtful. I let it go because letting things go had become the family sport in that house, and I had always been very good at it. The notebook I didn't find until after the phone call. We left the restaurant with a box of leftovers neither of us would eat and drove home without talking much. Colin reached over and squeezed my hand at a red light on Strandherd Drive, and I squeezed back, and neither of us said out loud what I was thinking. When we arrived at Gloria's, the hallway light was on, and Jack's boots were lined up by the door, toes forward, the way she always insisted they be kept. Gloria was on the couch with a cup of red rose and a calm expression, greeting us the way she'd greet people returning from a grocery run. "He's down," she said. "Fast asleep. He really did just have a little moment earlier, nothing to worry about." "He asked me if I was sick," I said. She tilted her head. "He's been asking me that about you lately, honestly. I think he picks up on stress more than we realize." She set down her mug. "I didn't want to say anything and alarm you, but I have noticed he seems anxious on the days you've been more." She paused, and in that pause she glanced at Colin, a small and careful look, the kind that says what the speaker won't. More overwhelmed. Colin's face had gone very still. "What has he been asking you?" he said. "Just worried child things. He loves his mom." Another gentle smile. "It's really not a big deal." "What exactly did you say to him tonight?" I said, "before you got on the phone?" "Nina, patient, librarian patient, the voice you use with someone who has misread the catalog. I told you, he had a moment, I handled it." I asked her to leave. I said it clearly, and without raising my voice, which surprised me as much as it appeared to surprise her. She gathered her coat and her bag, kissed Colin on the cheek, and said to me on her way out that she hoped I was getting enough rest. After she left, Colin stood in the front hall for a moment. He did not tell me I was overreacting. He looked at me and said quietly, "I'm going to go sit with Jack for a minute." I went to put my coat away and I found the pouch. It had fallen from Jack's jacket when I hung it on the hook, small, navy blue silver zipper. I held it for a moment, then I opened it. Inside, 2 phone numbers on a folded piece of paper in Gloria's handwriting, her cell and a number I didn't recognize. $11 in coins, careful and deliberate, the kind of amount a child could manage on his own. A single TTC token which meant nothing to us in Ottawa, except that it had been chosen, thought about, placed there. And a small index card in the same careful cursive. "If Mom seems like she's not herself, use this. Come straight to me. Don't wait for Dad to come home." I sat down on the floor of our front hallway, and I stayed there for a while. Colin found me like that. He read the card, he read it twice, then he set it on the floor in front of him with the deliberateness of a man handling something that might break. "There's more," I said, not because I had proof yet, because I knew. "We found the notebook in Jack's room. in the drawer of his bedside table, under his library books. A small coil-bound thing, the kind sold in 3-packs at Staples, with a label on the cover in Gloria's handwriting. Jack's private thoughts. She had been asking him to write things down. Entry after entry in his crooked printing, each one dated. Mom yelled at me for leaving my boots by the door. Jan 14, Mom forgot to sign my permission slip for the Heritage Fair. She said sorry but forgot again. Jan 28, Mom and Dad argued about something after I was in bed. I heard them. Feb 3, Grandma said that means Mom is getting worse. She said it's not my fault. Some entries had small annotations in Gloria's own handwriting in the margins. A question mark beside the permission slip. The word concerning underlined in pencil next to an entry about a Tuesday I remembered perfectly well. Jack had a cold. I had kept him home from school. We had watched Paw Patrol reruns under the same blanket all afternoon. The last entry was dated 2 days earlier. Grandma said the sign is almost here. She checked my backpack with me. She put in my bear. His stuffed bear. He had not slept with it in 2 weeks. I had asked where it was and he said he lost it. He had not lost it, it had been packed. I want to be honest about what I did not do in that moment. I did not call her. I did not call any member of Colin's family. I sat at our kitchen table until 3 in the morning, and I did not move until I understood the full shape of what I was looking at. Colin sat across from me the whole time. He read the notebook. He read it twice. When he set it down, his face looked like a man who had been shown that the floor beneath him was not the floor he thought he was standing on. She has been doing this since at least November, he said. Look at the early entries, I said. She started this before Remembrance Day. He looked at the notebook again. Then he looked at me. I need to go see her. Not tonight, I said. Tonight we back up everything first. We photographed every page. We logged the contents of the pouch. Colin wrote out a handwritten timeline of every date Gloria had been alone, with Jack set against the notebook entries. Every date matched. In the morning, before he did anything else, Colin went to see his mother alone. This matters. I did not go with him and I did not ask to. That conversation belonged to him, between a son and his mother, and I had enough clarity by then to understand that the version of it where I was in the room would have been the version Gloria had been preparing for, the unstable daughter-in-law, the dramatic accusation, the story that would write itself in her favor before I finished a sentence. Colin going alone removed her entire script. He was gone 2 hours. He came home, sat down at the kitchen table and said, she cried. She said she was only protecting Jack. She said she'd been watching me struggle with the schedule and watching you cope alone, and she didn't know what else to do. He stopped. Then I showed her the notebook, her own handwriting in the margins. Another stop. She said she was keeping a record, in case she ever needed to help. In case she needed to take him, I said. He didn't answer right away. He looked at the window and then back at me, and what was on his face was the expression of someone who had walked in to disprove something and walked out having proved it instead. She had already called a family lawyer, he said quietly. An appointment last week. She hadn't filed anything yet, but she had consulted. That sentence sat in the room, and neither of us spoke. There is a specific kind of grief that arrives when you discover that someone was not confused, not overzealous, not blinded by too much love, but deliberate. That there was a plan, that the plan had already reached a lawyer's office. I had been inside that grief since the notebook, but hearing it in Colin's voice, who loved his mother, who had no reason to tell me anything except the truth, was when it stopped being something I could still choose not to believe. We did what needed to be done in the right order. First, Jack. Colin found a child therapist in Nepean named Dr. Anand who had a cancellation within the week. She saw Jack 3 times, gently and without leading him, and she never once handed me a verdict to brandish. What she told us carefully at the end of those weeks was this: the patterns Jack described, the rehearsed instructions, the secrecy around signs, the conditioning around departure, were consistent with a child who had been taught, slowly and by someone he trusted, to anticipate removal from a safe parent. She offered to put her clinical observations in writing. I said yes. Second, the school. I went to Henry Munro in person and sat across from Jack's teacher and his principal with the notebook. Not to accuse anyone in that room, to establish a record with the right dates attached to the right name. The email I had received in November, the one about Jack, asking whether moms could get sick suddenly, now had a context. That context had a name, and that name had a volunteer reading program badge she had used in this building the previous year. I asked that her school access be flagged. They wrote it down. Third, Colin called the family lawyer his mother had visited and explained what had happened. There was nothing to discuss. No grounds, no custody concern on record, no existing order of any kind. The call was 4 minutes long and ended itself. The family dinner was Gloria's idea. She called it clearing the air, the way you call a fault line a hairline crack. Colin's 2 aunts were invited, his cousin. My own parents drove in from Perth on a Saturday. When we arrived, Gloria had arranged the chairs, so that she sat at the head of the table and I sat to the side. She had made coffee and set out butter tarts from the Rideau bakery, which she knew were Colin's favorite, and she had placed one on his plate before he sat down. She had done everything short of printing a seating chart. She spoke for 15 minutes. She was measured and maternal, and her eyes went wet at the right moments. She talked about losing her husband. She talked about Colin's childhood and what it had cost her to keep things steady after his father died. She talked about how much she loved Jack, which was true, and how worried she had been, which she framed as something everyone in the room had already quietly agreed on. She described herself as a woman who had given everything she had to this family and asked for nothing except to remain close. When she finished, the room was quiet. My mother's hand rested near mine on the table. I didn't argue a word of it. I reached into my bag and set 3 things down in front of everyone, one at a time, evenly spaced. The notebook. The index card from the pouch. Dr. Anand's written observations. This is what you put in your grandson's bedside table, I said to Gloria. My voice stayed level and I did not raise it. This is the card you put in the pouch you gave him to keep in his jacket every day. And this is what a child therapist wrote after sitting with him 3 times. I looked at Colin's aunts, and then at his cousin, and then at my parents. I am not asking anyone to take a side. I am asking you to read what is in front of you. Gloria reached for the notebook. She turned it over once and set it back down. Then she said, still calm, still patient, a notebook I gave him to process his feelings at home is not evidence of anything. Your handwriting is in the margins, Colin said. She looked at him. You wrote concerning beside an entry about a permission slip, he said. You annotated your grandson's private thoughts. You cross-referenced them. You took them to a lawyer. I was protecting him. Her voice was still level, but something had shifted underneath it. Someone had to, Colin. You work nights. She looked at me, and for the first time in that room, the patient slipped just at the corners of it. She is not equipped. She never has been. I was the one who was there when Jack was born. I was the one who was there every time you worked overnight. I have been there from the beginning. You were there because we asked you to be, Colin said. Not because we couldn't manage without you. You needed me, she said. I could see what neither of you wanted to admit. I have always been able to see it. What you could see, Colin said quietly, was a child who belonged to us and a life you had decided you deserved a larger part of. The silence after that stretched long enough that the refrigerator hum was audible from the kitchen. Gloria looked at the aunts, and then at the butter tarts no one had touched, and then at the table. Something in her expression, the careful warmth, the patient concern she had worn through the whole hour, went still and then collapsed inward all at once. I would have been a better mother to that boy than she has ever been, she said. She said it to the table rather than to me. She said it in the voice of someone who had been holding it inside for a very long time and had finally run out of room for it. Colin's aunt set down her coffee. His cousin looked at the window. My mother reached over and covered my hand with hers without saying anything. Nobody in that room argued, and nobody agreed, and that silence was its own verdict. I stood up. I gathered my 3 pages and put them back in my bag. I looked at Gloria once directly, and I said the only thing I had left to say to her. You don't get to be alone with my son, not ever again, and this is the last time this family sits down to discuss why. Colin was at the door before she spoke again. Whatever she said, it didn't matter. The rest of it came quietly, the way real consequences almost always do. Colin removed Gloria from the shared family calendar and from every contact list attached to Jack's school. I sent a short email to Henry Munro. The concerns previously raised about our home environment came from one source. That source no longer has access to Jack's school activities. Please update your records accordingly. I walked next door and told our neighbor Deb everything over coffee, and she listened, and she told me she was sorry, and that was the last time I ever had to explain myself to her. Gloria's family lawyer called once. Colin took it. There was nothing to file, nothing to argue, nothing that would survive a single question about the notebook. The call was 4 minutes. Gloria sent a letter a few weeks later addressed to me in careful cursive. It is in a folder on the top shelf of the hall closet, unopened. Maybe someday I will read it. I haven't needed to yet. Jack came back to me slowly, on his own schedule the way children do. He stopped pausing in doorways. He started leaving his bedroom door open at night instead of shut. After one of his sessions with Dr. Anand, he came out to the waiting room and climbed into my lap, which he had not done in over a year, and said very quietly that she had told him a secret that makes a child scared isn't a real secret. It's just a grown-up being wrong. He said it like he was testing whether that could possibly be true. I told him it was completely true, that it had always been true. He leaned his head against my shoulder, and I felt something in his small body release, just a little, and I held on to that the way you hold on to the side of a boat. One afternoon in June he brought me a drawing, holding it out with both hands the way you hand over something you've spent time on. My stomach tightened for 1 second before I looked. It was our house again. But this time the small figure was inside, standing at the window, looking out at the street. The door behind the figure was closed, and on the door, pressed in hard with his pencil, was a small lock. I kept drawing it open before, he said, like I was waiting outside. But this time I locked it, the right way. He looked up. The right people are already inside. I put it on the fridge. It's still there, next to the reminder for his school's winter concert and the photo from his 7th birthday, the one where he's laughing so hard at something, Colin said that his eyes are completely gone. There are mornings now when I'm standing at the kitchen window with my coffee and the motion light over the garage catches a branch, a bird, nothing. And for just that 1 second my whole body remembers the feeling of sitting in that restaurant and hearing my son's voice and understanding for the first time that something had been growing in my house for months without my knowing. The cold certainty of it, the way the floor tilted. And then the coffee finishes, and I hear Colin's boots on the mat, and Jack's cereal bowl comes sliding into the sink, and I remember that the people who were supposed to be here are here, and the ones who weren't are not. Welcome back to Mr. Nathaniel Stories. This is where we sit with the stories that remind us that quiet harm and quiet love can look almost identical from the outside, and that protecting your family sometimes means being willing to disturb a peace that was never truly peaceful. If something in this story reached you, leave a comment. I read everyone. Share it with someone who needs to hear that what you feel in your gut is worth listening to. And subscribe if you'd like to stay. We'll be here.